there's a challenge of mtoi akiadoptiwa, at some point they would want to go look for the biological parents. But then, could you contract someone, ndio wache kufuata hii due process, ukuwe na kandarasi na mtu, they have children for you, like two full couple, ni wangu huyu na shughulikia. Can you do that?
Okay, I hope I've understood your question.
Yes.
And it sounds like two things. There's adoption, which is the getting of parental rights of a child who is not yours biologically, but through the law now you get the parental rights over them.
Thank you.
What I think you are speaking about, where you're saying, can I get somebody, since I'm not being able to have a child, can I get somebody else to have children for me, and then niwachukue niwalee wawe wangu? Is that what you have asked?
Kuna hiyo ni ya surrogate.
Hiyo ni surrogacy.
Hiyo ni surrogacy.
Yeah. Okay.
But he ni specifically shopping, because my impression, thank you, actually you've defined adoption very well.
Yes.
My nini ya adoption, my understanding of adoption may be confused. You can actually go shopping for a baby. Like the difference between adoption, sini parental rights. The difference between adoption na other parenting, biological parenting, ni biological parenting, your child will be a surprise.
Yeah.
But this one, you at least you know what your baby will look like.
Okay, first of all, let us start here. For adoptions, there's nothing like baby shopping. In fact, you're not allowed to baby shop. And so there are procedures that have been put in place on how that child will finally be received into your care. Okay? And maybe if you just allow me, it is this way. So the children who get to be adopted may arise from various ways.
Yes.
It might be children who have been abandoned. Maybe a mom who was just unable or is not able to take care of the child. So after pregnancy, give birth, neglects the child or throws in the bin or whatever. So a rescued child like that. Okay. It might also be an unplanned pregnancy. Maybe a young girl still in school, doesn't know what to do. She offers that child out for adoption. Or even an older person who, gang rape for instance, you're just not going to be able to keep that child. So you offer that child up for adoption. Those children, when they are found or received, then go through the process of confirming there's nobody else who would be claiming them. You see, like now, say the young girl who we're talking about, maybe the dad, even if he's young or not or unready, might be willing to take care of that child. So that process has to be checked. It's only after 6 weeks that child has to be over 6 weeks old, has to have been checked that there's nobody claiming so that they can be ready for adoption. And in fact, they have to be certified as free for adoption. So sio kuchagua yeyote na kumpeleka nyumbani.
Bado nitakuwa na swali hapo kwa kuchagua, but if you adopt a child alafu afike mahali anataka kwenda kwa biological parents, that means you just hired that baby.
Okay, so thank you for that question. Again, once you go through the adoption process, because as it is, there are quite a number of stages. Once that adoption order has been made, it is not revocable. You can't come back and say, siitaki. So, even that child, pengine afike 14, aanze kusema sitaki hapa nataka kurudi, they don't get that opportunity to do that because the adoption order, as I said, severes the parental ties of the biological parents and vests them in the adopting parent. And that's why it's so important that the study, the background check and everything be done so carefully so that even if they're biological parents, they have given their consent. And that's why that child is free for adoption. So it's not a baby for hire, akifika a certain age, atake kuenda umwambie aende ama wewe uchoke umwambie aende. It's serious.
Na hii world things change. In the event this is a loophole. When a lawyer utaniambia.
Nitakwambia.
In the event an adoptive parent becomes a deadbeat. I know the process. You can be taken to court and sued for parental.
Absolutely.
What will the court say? Do a DNA test.
Okay, I'll listen to your question.
Yes, you loophole.
See your loophole.
You can confidently go for fanyeni DNA.
Let me tell you, apana, if you have adopted and you've adopted through the proper legal channels, you're in every way fully and completely the parent of that child. The law, of course, is recognizing that this is not your biological child. So DNA itakujia wapi? So it's not for an adopted child. It's no longer an issue of let's check DNA so that I confirm whether I have responsibility over you.
Let's check the papers.
Here are the papers. Are you my adopting parent? And if you are, case closed. Sasa take responsibility.
Cheza kama wewe.
Cheza kama wewe.
Kai.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I really hope that children get the responsibility, because I mentioned that every child in this world is a product of two people. And apart from cases of where someone is an orphan, or the other circumstances that you mentioned, there are sometimes we have people who don't take responsibility for children. But then, when you come to think about the institutions that the government has put in place where children can be wanaweza wekwa, so that adoptive parents can go sourcing. Acha niseme sourcing. Nimesema you can't go baby shopping.
Yes.
You go sourcing there. My question now becomes, this if everything was fine, can there be, do they have suppliers? Like they are an institution that gives children. Do they have suppliers? Like they even have people, kama watoto wameisha wenye wanaweza letwa, mtu anaweza kuja aseme, nataka mtoto anakaa hivi, and they have people who have babies for them for adoptive purposes.
Okay, all right. Now, so here is the way that it goes. There'll be what you're referring to are the children's homes, isn't it? The charitable children's homes or organizations.
Yes.
That is the storage place or the home that will take care of the children, and there are various ways the children can exit those homes.
Yes.
It can be through adoption, it can be through fostering, it can also be through reunification with their families.
Okay.
Sawa? Now, so wako hapo na wako wengi maybe.
Yes.
Then kuna adoption societies.
Yes.
The adoption societies are the link between the charitable children's homes and the adopting parent. So parent hataenda directly kwa charitable children's home, ataenda kwa adoption society. And maybe the narrative from that person who wishes to, the prospective adoptive parent, I'm interested to adopt. Maybe I'm over 40, so I'd like a child who's a little older, maybe a 3-year-old to 5-year-old.
Yes.
And the capacity that I have is maybe for a healthy child. Because somebody else might have a capacity for, even if the child has some special needs, I have capacity to layer a child like that. The adoption society will then liaise with the children's, charitable children's home.
Yeah.
Remember I said every child who can be offered for adoption has to be free for adoption. So background check yake lazima iwe imefanyiwa, confirming there's no one else claiming such a child. And so it is not ati mzazi aende hapa aanze kuchagua huyu ni sijui light skin, huyu ni dark, huyu looks healthy.
Yes.
Not like that. It's not a meat market when it comes to babies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So na watoto wakipungua kwa adoption societies, they don't have suppliers. People who supply them with children.
Not really. Well, the ideal situation would be this way, that there were no children in those organizations, isn't it? That every child would be in a loving family being taken care of. Yes. But of course, we are also alive to the realities of our situation, the socioeconomics, problems like those. So often there will be a child who is vulnerable and is in such care. Where do they come from? Usually it will be maybe hospitals where they've been neglected, and the police stations where a report is made that mtoto fulani amepatikana mahali. So the necessary administrative work is done, then the child is taken to the children's home, ndio mambo yake iprocessiwe. People get to know, are there any parents claiming where does this child come from and what can be done. So that's the source. That's where the source of such babies would be.
And one of the rules, I believe it's still in the Children's Act, as far as adoption is concerned, is that if you are a couple that is adopting a child, you must be married for at least 3 years.
Correct.
You are an expert in family matters.
Yes, I am.
So 3 years, ukiona marriage yako imefika 3 years, inamaanisha you could have a future.
Correct.
Why 3 years?
Why 3 years? It's exactly what you have said. At least there's some form of stability there. Yeah, mume settle down, and for all intents, you should be ready. It's not your first year where you're trying to settle down, you're bringing a baby into the settling, and maybe the little bit of upheaval that might be there. Again, maybe it's your honeymoon phase, maybe you want to complete that. It's more about the stability of that marriage.
So married couples should not be excited about happily ever after before 3 years.
Here's the thing as well, most likely that couple that just got married is probably also trying to have their children biologically.
Okay.
So maybe that is what might be happening. And then at 3 years, perhaps the realization that maybe our children will not come through biology, maybe our children will come through a different way of expanding our family, which is adoption. So it's really about a stabilizing situation for that newly married couple.
So for new couples, after 3 years of intensive trying, you should consider other options.
Well, sometimes they say, sometimes even couples when they're dating might even already start to say, you know, I would like, I'm a product of adoption, and it's one of the things I would like to do.
Yes.
But sasa mkioana, you want to wait a little bit just to see how are we doing together, yeah? And here's the thing, sometimes adoption is not necessarily because people can't be able to have children of their own biologically. Sometimes it might be just
they don't want to have babies of your own.
Maybe they don't want, but also they want to take in another child. Perhaps they were helped in their own lives, and now they want to also love a child who doesn't have a family to love them. So sio ati lazima ni kwamba tumejaribu tumeshindwa, and now option B.
Okay.
Although a lot of times that is indeed the case.
In your experience, is the obsession with biological children justified?
No.
Mimi nataka mtu tunafanana na yeye mtu.
No, I would say no, especially because we are an African community.
Yes.
And even if you looked back how communities lived and villages lived, the children belonged to everybody. And so I think that the Kenyan community at large has had that thing of watoto lazima walelewe mahali. Yes. And it doesn't have to be my child. I mean, I could be feeding 8 who are some of my sisters, some of my brothers. That was culturally what was happening.
Okay.
Now, what we must do, and what I really do advocate, is to stop the stigma on adoption by stopping that narrative that the child must look like me in order for them to get a loving family to take care of. So for me, I would say it is not a good thing to be too rigid.
Do you think it would help if the government then decided to give a directive that we have enough children to go around, so no one should make any more babies? Moving forward to Siskie,
I don't even think that the government would have capacity to be able to do that. That would be such an intrusive law. You must let nature take its course. Those who are being able to have babies must be able to be allowed to have their children. The children who are vulnerable must have administrative processes that are in place to place them in homes or in places where they can get their love. So the issue should not be to stop people from. The more important thing is these children, because they will be received into this society of ours, what do we have in place to recognize that children are vulnerable, number one, and if they'll not be taken care of by those who have been able, who are in families and are taking care of them that way, what are the processes that are in place to ensure that they are well taken care of? I
think in a way you've answered the question that I asked initially about adoption societies having suppliers, and I think they do, just that it's unofficial. There's
an ideal way of doing things, but we all know in society it's never ideal, isn't it?
Yes,
so maybe there could be situations where, I mean, we've had them in the past, maybe traffickers, maybe what, but I always say the issue of trafficking is completely different from the issue of adoption, because adoption is a legal process. Traffickers might be those, I don't want to, sorry to use the word, but maybe bush doctor, watoto wanazaliwa hapo, there's no processes that are in place, it's not being done according to the law. So those you'd say are like suppliers.
Yes.
That's not the way it should be.
Yeah, and before I got information, in fact, when we spoke to you, I got a clearer picture of why the government would ban foreigners from adopting children from Kenya. We were like, si tukigrow up ulikuwa unatamani ukwe mzungu ati ni aje unachukulia unaenda America. But I think when you explain that traffickers would actually take advantage and exploit such an arrangement, then it made sense.
Yeah, but also just to be very, very clear, here's what I think, because having had the experience of doing adoptions even when foreigners were adopting,
Yes.
Again, I think it's so important to be very clear that there is adoption and then there is trafficking.
Yes. Yes.
Even
yes.
those foreigners that would come to Kenya would
Yes.
have to go through very strict measures from their home country, the Hague Convention stipulations, then they come here, they are interviewed, they have to stay here for quite a long time. They were not the profile of traffickers.
Yes.
Okay? They were not the profile of traffickers. Something else would be looked at, but they were not the profile of traffickers.
Okay.
That's not to say that traffickers do not exist.
Yes.
Traffickers exist, but traffickers will not submit themselves to court process, to being checked, their background, to all of that. Wako na wanaendelea kuwa kichini chini. Two different things, very important
Okay.
to
Sawa.
differentiate.
Sometimes I give a submission and then I get corrected.
Okay.
We know that, yes, there are advantages to adoption.
Yes.
We have, like I've said, enough babies to go around. And some people, save for the cases of the special circumstances that we've talked about, someone's an orphaned children, we have cases of people who can't have children. When a couple can have children, they
Yes.
know they can. Would you classify them, and they prefer to go the adoption way, would you classify them as too lazy to make babies? Now, it's something that's written in the Bible. Of course, it's a sin not to have babies. If you look at what it's written, tuzaane tujaze dunia,
First
could
of all,
be a
we
sin.
have to check whether it's really a sin not to have babies, but hey, I'm listening to your
You are not
submission.
following the commandments of the Lord. Tuzaane tujaze dunia. You're not doing your part. Someone would argue that.
Okay.
Unajaza dunia na watoto wa wengine. Like, what are you doing yourself? Again, are you too lazy to make babies or too busy to make babies?
Okay, that would be more of a moral question, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah? So what's my take on it? If you're able to form a family that can then create a safe and loving space for a child,
Yes.
by all means, that's the thing to do. That's
Yes.
what every child deserves. If for whatever reason you're unable to, then maybe it's not altogether something that they should be shunned, or people said you're lazy, because it could be for very specific reasons. And I don't want to say career, but here's the thing. If maybe you move from job to job to job to job, so you look at your situation and like, man, is this going to create a safe and stable space for a child?
Yes.
Maybe let me first do all of these things that I need to do. Then unfortunately, or the way that it then turns out is that by the time you're done with all of that, maybe your own body can't carry the child.
Yes.
And therefore you have to go the way of adoption.
Yes.
Maybe it was a brave decision to make, to not have the child if you would not be able to offer them the kind of loving space that they require.
Okay.
So if you're a couple, and yes, maybe biologically you can, but for one reason or another, looking at your circumstances, you feel, man, we might not be able to have some of our, to have some of our own because of whatever might be prevailing, and then later you realize you need to do adoption. I don't think that's a problem. But maybe what you're asking is that we get married, we are very able to do it, but maybe I don't want the body changes that come with
Yes,
the
stretch marks.
Of stretch marks and
Yes.
all things hanging all over the place, and so I decided to go the way of adoption. Well, I always look for the silver lining. At least another child somewhere gets the benefit of a loving home.
And another child gets to maintain the way they were born.
And another child gets, if that is something that is such a priority. Yeah, but more of a moral question, I think.
And as a parent,
Yes.
if you had children, you are a couple, can you decide to give up your children for adoption?
No. Well, there must be real, tangible reasons for why you're just offering up your children for adoption. I mean, I can't just say, I'm so tired of these three of mine.
They look like your neighbor. Like, you can have them.
Well, you see, now we are touching on something else. It would be, is there a problem? Yeah?
Yes.
Is it true that maybe DNA-wise, maybe these children who are here are not really ours, both of us? And then problems are arising. And because of that, now you need to look all the time. It's about what's the best thing for the children. So if you are married, there's no problem, the children are there, it's just that, man, I'm not being able to do this and that. You can't just decide, I want to give them up. Because one of the things they'll check is why. And what will you say? You can't say, because I'm tired. The reasons that are often would be received for people giving up the child, as I had said, unwanted pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies, maybe a rape of your wife within the home and she's just too distraught to be able to keep that child. So you're married, but what do? It's always a reminder, yeah? So that one may be, sometimes the economics might also lead to requiring the children to be taken over by somebody else. But even for economics, if you're two and you're able, the main thing would then be, how do we assist you so that the children remain with the family where they were born? So the spirit of the law is, as much as possible, children should remain within the families that they were born in.
I asked that because of the best interest of the child. You mentioned it. And I asked that for the main reason of, there are cases that we've seen happening to children. Sorry to say, the sad stories come as someone pitters with their children and their family. You're like, why wouldn't you have just given them up instead of getting to that point? You would rather give them to someone
who can take
rather
care
than
of them.
say, get rid of them.
Yeah, and most of the time, and sorry if I hadn't let you complete the question, most of the time, if you check on such people who have gone and just done that bad thing of maybe killing all the children, drowning the children, they'll usually have some mental situation that's going on, some desperation that has led them to the brink, because no normal, ordinary person will do something like that, or are in some cult. Now, those would be tangible reasons why the children need to be removed from that space, because it's no longer the kind of space I was talking about, the loving, healthy space where children should grow. So that of itself would be a good reason, not even for waiting for the parents to offer the children, but for whoever has noted that there's a problem to make the report. And it would be now nice to know, where do I make such a report? To make a report so that they can then be a situation of saving those children, because they're definitely in a vulnerable situation.
Okay. Let me put a situation to you. Someone has raised children all the way, say, to university. And these are stories that happen. You've raised children, you have a happy family, father, mother, and children, like 3 kids, for example. And then after they are done with school, you get to learn credibly that they are not your biological children, but you've raised them knowing that they are your biological children. As, say, a man in this case, what are you supposed to do?
Okay. Now, you said until university. I want to change your question a little bit, if you'll allow me, because usually there's the age of 18 and below. Those are the ones who will be considered children. So you have your 18-year-old and your 17 and your 10-year-old, and you've been raising them, and they know you as daddy. All right? So you have acquired parental responsibility over them by that fact alone. Okay? Then you discover that it has all been a lie. The law does now, there's a moral question again, because a lot of dads who will be found in that situation are not ready to let go. Because, man, the investment, the bonding, for all intents, these have been your children, correct? And if you're just a normal, ordinary adult person here, chances are you want to fight for them simply because of what kind of upheaval will be caused by them now, by you now disowning them. Okay? Now, you acquire parental responsibility when you've been the person who has been, say, maintaining them over the years. And you can't just get rid of it just like that because of the discovery. However, if it is a pure case of deception, then you have avenues. And of course, what will be weighed is, what's the best interests of these children? Because maybe you'd be going and saying, I didn't sign up for a lie like this, and the law would listen. I mean, it does have a provision for listening, because it's the issue of deception. But by and large, often what will happen is, these days there's a lot of mediation that goes on in the family court. We have instances where maybe the fellow who was deceiving, he's at large. If the children are not yours and we've been raising them, see, there's somebody else who's at large. If they're the ones who are claiming, would have to check at the very end of settling this thing, what's the best interest for these children? You have to consider the upheaval, the confusion, the stress, just the difficulty that you'd be throwing them into by some disowning of a parent who, this is all that, Remember, they're not part of the lie. They're just products of it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah? So it can't be for them, it can't be their burden to carry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, just like that. You don't wake up and start making your own children. Like, that's an option. Would you be judged for that?
To do
like,
what?
Hey, I've been here all this time. Now let me go make my babies now.
Now, because these ones you're considering to be what?
I'm thinking as an African, a typical African.
That
of course,
these are not really mine. They are really yours if you have acquired parental responsibility.
Now the other part of your generation. Like Sasa, now you want to create the next level of your generation. Yes, these are your children responsibly, but you've been watering seeds from elsewhere. I'm thinking as an African, yes. So yes, you can continue the responsibilities, but for, do we call it posterity?
You go and get another one
to
over
continue,
there.
To continue.
Here is the thing, Daktari. If you're going to make children, if you're going to be responsible for them, and you're not having them because of your personal interest and ego, because that's what it's sounding like.
Oh, posterity is ego.
Posterity sounds to me like ego, because who are these? And can they not? I mean, you've been raising this fellow, you've given them your support, your guidance, everything. They're an expression of the experience they've been having of you, isn't it?
I'm talking about doing it for the historians. When the historians come and they start looking for the way they do DNA for Black Americans to find out where you actually came from in Africa.
Yes.
There's a place in your family tree that you disappear, right? Doesn't everyone has a right to try to continue the family tree from there?
I think it's such a choice that you make. It's not a must that you try. It's not a must that your blood must flow through the generations. Might be a good thing if it hasn't happened. Yeah? Yes. And now you have a 20-year-old or a 19. So just above the age where you could even have said something about it.
Yes.
A 15 who looks to you as dad. Yes. What are you saying that you will do? That you will disown this and now you will go start again because you want your blood to be flowing in there?
Yes.
Too much.
Yes, you have them. Yes, you've done that, and you may continue doing that.
Yes.
But now you go back to you.
That's a personal choice, and nobody can stop you from making that personal choice. If you feel very strongly that, man, even my own, who will stop you? Provided that now when you go and you have, because most likely, by the time you're getting to that situation, there's probably upheaval in the home, isn't it?
Yes.
No doubt. You've discovered the deception. Most likely, maybe there's a divorce going on or someone else speaking and wondering, how are we going to resolve this?
Yes.
Now, if that marriage will not stick because of the problems that have now been discovered, and you become a free entity because you're no longer married to this one, you want to go and try your luck, you go try your luck. Just be ready to
just to
raise.
know if your nini is working. Just don't you deserve to know?
So, well, you might deserve to know, but for what reason are you having those children? So that you get to know whether your machines are working.
No, it's important.
Or is it because?
Closure.
Closure for what?
If you
for what, sir?
Because it means you would want to know whether the deception saved you, the deception gave you a chance to have children. You see, that's how I would investigate. I would investigate by
yourself.
Yes,
you would investigate
to get scientific evidence.
If you choose, because it's a choice you can make to investigate self, just know this, that once you have been able to confirm that, well, the machines do work and a baby is born, provided you're then ready to take responsibility for that child from the time that they start to exist until and meet their needs, I don't think anybody would.
In that case, if you have taken responsibility for people and raised them to probably adult stage, you should, in this case, you'll just be continuing the family tree.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody would jail you for that, just provided you take responsibility.
And in terms of protection, I've seen in the movies, I reference movies a lot on this show. The level of protection of children in other countries, developed countries, is way better than in Kenya. Like, I don't know of chokoras in the US, or as they call them, chokora is a little derogatory, street children, I think children are more protected in that they are taken to foster care. It's taken very seriously. If children reported their parents of having mistreated them, the government swings into action. I don't know how true that is, or that's the image they want us to see in the movies.
Right.
But it's an image that you would wish to be replicated back home. Children to have a social protection system that works. How bad is ours, or how good is it?
Okay, this is what I would say. For as long as we have the kind of socio-economic situation that we have in our society, we will continue to deal with these problems of extremely vulnerable children. Because when the community itself can't feed itself, when you can't feed yourself and I can't feed myself, and then we have a child, that child is 10 times more vulnerable than I am, because I could go beg, but the child is completely vulnerable. So the first thing that we need to check on is policy to ensure the eradication of poverty, to upgrade social economies of people, to empower them to be able to take care of themselves and therefore be able to take care of their offspring, number one. And it's important, and it is not just a job of the parents, because children are actually wards of government. So it's a responsibility that government cannot shirk and say, shauri yenu mmezaa sana, endeni mkaji tetee mkaji pange. No, it's a responsibility of government as well as parents. So what would government do? I think it would be in policy making and the recognition of the vulnerability of children.
So we should actually blame government, because every time someone makes a baby, you are producing a taxpayer.
You're producing a taxpayer, but I'm not going to say that it's a blanket, sasa serikali nisaidie. No, what I said is that the responsibility cannot be completely shirked away by government. It belongs to the parents, and it also belongs to the government. So for parents, what you will do is to think, and I think you made that point. You can't just produce so many of them if you already know that your circumstances cannot allow for you to be able to take care of them. Okay? So personal responsibility. Now, but in terms of, is there infrastructure that enables me, say, from wherever I'm coming from, to at the very least be able to move across to the other side, make some money. Yeah, do something that will then take home and feed my children. Yeah, or is it when I come to lay my wares, there is city council beating me, there is what have you, so making it impossible for a parent to take care of their children is not okay, and that goes to policy. Yeah, so for me, yes, it looks rosier in countries which have got their act together in terms of policies, especially, that take care of the social economics, because it all begins there. If I'm able to work, I will go work. But if there are riots every day and there's upheaval, I'll not be able to, and as a result, my children will suffer.
Okay. I read some interesting statistics that up to 30% of Kenyan couples in a marriage situation are not able to have their own biological children. So inamaanisha adoption is an option for very many people.
Absolutely.
But then in this context of adoption, how real is it compared to having your biological children? Can you beat an adopted child like it was your own?
Here's the thing. Once you adopt, in fact, once you adopt, that child is yours. You throw away the tag of adopted, okay? It is your child. Once it is your child, you have the rights, the obligations, the duties of parenting that child. Whether it is my biological child or a child that I have adopted, am I supposed to beat them and injure them? If I'm not supposed to beat and injure my biological child, I'm not supposed to do that to my adopted child. If I can do punishments and guide them and support them in, the biblical spare the rod, spoil the child, but with obvious limitations, because you've got to know what you're doing and be reasonable and responsible as a parent. There is no tag to say, because this one is adopted, I've got to behave differently. And it's with everything, including even when you die. Inheritance, they don't start looking for who was biological and who was adopted.
Okay.
Including this, if I have my 3 and I adopt another one, it's not the right thing to do, and I'm introducing them to you to say, hawa ni watoto wangu na huyu ni wangu through adoption.
Okay.
No, because that's stigmatizing
Okay.
and labeling. Once you adopt, that is your child.
And
Period.
when when you give up a child for adoption, in the cases where parents give consent to
Yeah.
chukua mtoto for whatever reason, and it's accepted, then your child becomes the president. Are you allowed to talk about president in this case is figurative? Are you allowed to talk about, hey, that's hiyo ni yangu? Can you talk about that? Ama there
Maybe to
is-
your friend next door, because it's not, if you gave up that child and the child went through the legal process of adoption and now is with the adoptive family, your parental ties to that child were severed legally. Okay? Let's get that right first. So you can you can whisper to your neighbor, ni mbegu yangu pale, but you have absolutely no rights. That child has absolutely no obligation to you, because that's the other thing that happens. You give up the child and maybe they go and they prosper. Yeah? And now you feel entitled to maybe I should get something from that child.
Yes.
Oh no. First of all, remember we said after adoption, DNA doesn't count because it's not about the biology. It's about the legal process that has happened. You severed the ties, so you stay.
Your only choice now is to make another one like that one.
You have no rights or obligations or duties to the one that you gave up, who then went through the adoption, the legal adoption process.
And in your experience in Family Matters, you've seen so much kisirani and vituko in the context of family. Don't you get to a point that you feel like it's a facade? It's not something real. It's marriage is a big lie. Don't you get to points?
No, I would say not really, because even with all the problems that are there, and you see what we see mainly, like somebody coming to me is mainly because maybe there's some dysfunction or some problem. For all of those, there are so many others that are good and that are working and that are safe places for people. So I don't particularly find it as a sham. I completely acknowledge and appreciate that if people are having problems, then they have avenues where they can come, and then it can be inatatuliwa with dignity. Because that's the whole thing. It doesn't actually have to be kisirani and people beating each other. You just do good, dignified exits. That is what will lead to health, happiness, lack of toxicity, you see? So it's not a sham. It does sometimes become very troublesome or difficult, but by and large, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
You said something very interesting that I really hope people can get. You said that most marriages don't work for one unique reason, over expectations. I love
mismanaged expectations. True.
It's mismanaged expectations. So marriages that don't work, it's because you don't get what you hoped for.
Not all of them, that's my disclaimer, but a lot of them, and the discussion we're having was especially for younger marriages, is that you go in with expectations that are almost impossible to be met. So you go in with very mismanaged expectations. I'm going in and then I can just rest and somebody can just absolutely take care of me, or he'll complete me or she'll complete me, and then you stop being responsible for the part that you must play. So, sounding preachy, but
marriage is no comfort zone.
It's not a comfort zone, It's I like to say this, it's a commitment and it's a responsibility. That's what it is. It has its fun and frills, but it's by and large a commitment and a responsibility, because it then becomes not just the two of you, there are families involved, and then there are children that will come in. You can't just get sick and tired and leave, because you've created, there's a product of the marriage that you've created that now requires your responsibility and your commitment to it. And a lot of times if you're now not able, or you don't want, or your expectation was just for fun times and continuation of how the dating scene looked, obviously you'll have problems and you'll want out
I remember the context that we were talking in was people can date for up to 10 years. 10 years you are together, 10 years mnakuanga wale. And then you now set up a wedding, everything, shamra. And then these people, these same individuals that lasted together for 10 years, in the context of a marriage, they cannot do 2 years.
Commitment and responsibility is a huge thing when you really think about it. And sometimes then it gets scary or it gets too challenging for people and you feel stifled and you want out. As you were dating, maybe you felt that there's still like a possibility that I can leave. I think freedom,
people just want
freedom
to
is something
the
that's
idea
quite
that
innate.
I can leave.
So when you think about it, really, you see, because a lot of times it's the shamra you're saying. So the event is beautiful.
Yes.
You spend lots and lots of money and energy on the event.
Yes.
Cameras imeitwa, it's looking good.
Yes.
But you're not thinking about it as the process. Because marriage is a process.
Okay.
You know, and when you began, you talked about the 3 years of fast settling down.
Yes.
And then the hardships. And last, then you realize, bills. So you're adulting in there. There's responsibilities, there's commitments. So if you're ready for it, then chances are you'll be able to work it through. But if you're not, if it becomes a challenge or if it's challenging for you, then chances are you will have difficulties.
So if you allow me to rephrase your answer, marriage is a calling.
It's a responsibility and a commitment.
Sawa. And for adopted children, once someone gets to learn that they are adopted, do they need to be informed in the sense of this is how the system works? And I know of someone who went looking for their biological parents and they really got their adoptive parents very mad.
Okay.
Do the children have a right to know or interact with their biological parents? Is there a limit to that?
That is such a great question, and I'm so happy that we get to discuss it. So, there's right to information.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And it's a good thing. And the law allows for it. So here's what happens. Like in the Children's Act, the adoption process of itself has some clauses that allow for confidentiality. Okay? And they're quite strict. You don't just expose documentation relating to adoptive parents, adopted child, etc. Now, once you have received that child in your care and you're growing with them, and you know you're privy to the information, obviously, that they're not your biological children, but you receive them through this different process of adoption. My view, and maybe it's my personal view, is that information is a good thing even for that child. Once a child feels loved and settled and safe, and then you start in a child-friendly way informing them, or when they ask you, don't lie. Because some of the questions are really like, how come everybody else is this color and me, I'm not this color?
Yes.
How come my hair, such questions. So you start to feed that curiosity, but with truth. So that, if they're asking, then when they are at an appropriate age, more information, so that they grow knowing that they are fully loved in that place where they are, even though they didn't necessarily come there biologically. So that anybody else saying anything to them from outside, they already have that knowledge. It will not shock them. It will not make them sad. They'll be strong and they'll say, yes, that's the way it happened, because for me, we had to go through the legal process, period. And there's no stigma, and there shouldn't be any. What is a problem is lies, especially, because then at a certain age, they will get to know, and then they'll not trust you, and then there'll be a problem.
Oh, okay. I like that you mentioned the color there, and knowing that children would ask such questions, I think people should be allowed to shop for babies. Shop for a baby that looks like you.
Okay, I'll say this. It is not a meat market, and it will never be and should never be allowed to be a meat market when you're looking for your baby. Yes. However, when people go to the adoption society, you see, the adoption society is not, they're trained people. So there are things they will be looking at as well, including features. And so there's what we call matching of children. Okay?
So it's at the discretion of the agency.
So it's something that happens, it's something that will be happening, but it's not the sort of thing, because I mean, I may look this way when I'm born and grow into something different. You see? Yes. So it can't be not this one, but this one, because that's even just not okay. They're not on display to be
because
pinky ponky or what have you. Yeah, but you will have given your pictures, you'll have given even your demographics, we are of this age. So there's a lot of matching that goes on. Okay. And I'll tell you this, which is very, very interesting, by the way, in my many years of having done this work of adoption, you'll find this, that sometimes a couple will come because they've not been blessed with a biological child. And therefore, they are opting to expand the family through adoption. And they adopt the first child. And you know, later they do get the possibility of having a biological child. Surprisingly, the children end up kind of looking the same. Yeah, the features kind of looking the same.
The way marriage works.
Yeah, I think people exactly. So you're drinking the same water and eating the same food. Somehow similarities grow. You're experiencing the same situations. So somehow the similarities grow. So I definitely am not an advocate for, let's look at the features. Features change as people go along. So it's more of what's the temperament? What do you as parents need, and what does this child, where's the background? Yeah, how well equipped are you to be taking this one instead of this one? Real things that are for the best interests of the child.
Now, in your experience, umekutana na wakora wa adoption. A husband goes out there and has children, alafu he brings them into the main family through adoption process.
No. And the reason why it's a no is that such cases are dealt with differently. Because you see, now that's not an adoption. Because an adoption is a legal process. Lazima aende kotini, adopt and get an adoption order. I suspect that the one that you're saying is, there was a side lady, or even before you married this one, there were some 2 children. Sasa huyo lady ameleta shida. Now you've been plumbed to the children, so you bring them home and you say, this is what's going to happen. These children will remain here. Is that the kind of situation you're talking about? That's not
adoption. You can't adopt your mpango wa kando kids.
Okay. Adoption is not what adoption is not. Adoption is not, you've picked the child and you've taken them home. That's not adoption. At the very, the only way of describing that, but even very loosely, is that you're fostering that child. Although even fostering now, if you go into the legals of fostering, which is a whole different debate, even that one needs some paperwork. Fostering a child, or me keeping my neighbor's child for even 10 years, doesn't mean that I've adopted that child. If I have not gone through the court process, the legal process, and obtained an adoption order, then I've not adopted. It is not an adoption, just me keeping children in my house.
That's not.
It's not adoption.
You have to follow the
You must.
So if you take them to court, alafu waingie kwa nyumba through court, that's
different. And most likely, if that's the way you're going to do it, even your wife, who you're taking them to, would be asked for consent, because adoption is really very legal. Where are you taking these children? I'm taking them to live in this place. Who else lives there? Who are the other adults that live there? Let's get their consents. So you see, you can't surprise her. Yeah, but the other one would be more of custody. Custody, maybe like the woman who you are thinking will layer on the side has refused. Now you're stuck with 2 babies there. So you get a custody order, and you kind of have to tell your wife, do you not, that, this is what has happened.
The importance of being someone's dad or someone's mom plays out in emergencies in a very interesting way. Correct me if I'm wrong. We had a discussion with a friend of mine who told me that if your name is not on a child's birth certificate, even if you've raised them for the longest time, if your name is not on the child's birth certificate and they were in, say, God forbid, an emergency like a surgery that needs a parent to sign off, you cannot do that.
It's the truth. That's the absolute truth. Because what's your nexus? So the birth certificate then becomes a very important document. And another side, whatever, which maybe we'll talk about another time, would be the X's that we see in the birth certificates.
You can just give a highlight.
Now, here's the thing. If your name is not there, then you're not the recognized parent, unless, of course, you have a custody order, which you can then use in place of the fact that you're not in the birth certificate. How about, and now, there's the other thing where, if, for instance, that child then is sick and needs blood, and you would have been able to, if we can be able to identify who you are. You see, such things. So sometimes people do things without thinking about the repercussions for later. What if, as a single or a mom, now this fellow, you're not treating us well, and so on and so forth, and so I put X, as though the child doesn't have a father.
Yes.
Yet, as you started by saying, children are the products of two people, isn't it? So when I put X, why am I doing that? If it's not in the best interest of the children, then I should put, because that's the heritage of a child. That's information that a child ought to know, including, in, for instance, now they needed, say, a transplant. Yeah, and maybe that's the person who would have been able to offer that, but they don't have that information because it was never written. What have you done to such a child? So just the issue of identification of itself makes it important for information to be available, because it's factual. There's some things that you can't rub away. They're factual, so put it in. Absolutely put it in, because it's helpful for a child. Even just that knowledge of, oh, you mean he was called so-and-so. If they're still living in a place of love and they're settled and they're happy, chances are they may not need even to look, unless maybe just for curiosity.
Yes.
But other than that, they're okay. But when somebody's not okay because you have a missing gap in your life and nobody to offer you that information truthfully and in a way, an inappropriate way, then it becomes a challenge, which is unnecessary.
So the XXX on the birth certificate is not a wise decision if you're looking at the bigger
We'd
picture.
have to look at what are the circumstances. If it was a gang rape, by all means, you're excused.
Yes, yes.
Okay?
Yes. Yes.
If it was a rape, by all means, again, you're excused, because who's that stranger? But if you're in a relationship, and that's daddy and your mommy, there's no reason why it shouldn't be put there.
Despite your differences.
Despite your differences, because isn't that the heritage of that child? Isn't that the child's reality?
Okay.
Yeah. And same case even now after adoption. Isn't it their right to just know what their heritage was, but it has changed? But you're telling them in such appropriate tones and times that it's helpful, not confusing. So it's just that whole thing of how to do it. And maybe that's a whole education that we all need to just get better and better.
And before we let you go,
Yes.
the solution would be, if you have a child that you're raising, make sure that the terms are very clear in this sense. Who are you to this child? Because if you ever need to sign off something, if they ever be, God forbid, in a medical condition that needs you as a person to intervene, you need to know the terms and you need to have it documented.
Yes. In fact, not just that it's the good thing to do, but it's the law. Every child is supposed to have a birth certificate.
Okay.
And it's for many, many reasons, not just even the heritage I'm talking about, but even administratively.
Okay.
Yeah, the government must know how many people we are.
Okay.
There's a database for that. So it is a child's right to have a birth certificate.
Okay.
So as you're acquiring that birth certificate, what do? You want to be as truthful and as factual as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, unless circumstances don't allow it, as you know, the ones that I talked about.
Okay.
But by and large, if they do, be factual, because that information, just as you're saying, may be required later, and it will be just a bad problem for the child if it's not there. So yes, documentation is important, and it's good to keep it factual and truthful.
That's an important point. And I also believe that if you say that you follow due process as far as adoption is concerned, at some point documentation may need to be changed. Does the name change on the birth certificate that now you are the father?
Yes. So here's what happens. You get an adoption. So the baby was born, okay? And maybe even, the baby was found. Let's even talk about a baby who was found. So
yes.
Mother XXX, father XXX on the birth certificate.
Yes.
Because the birth certificate is for registration of a birth.
Yes.
A birth occurred in Kenya, so that birth has been registered.
Yes.
Okay? Then after the adoption process, you get an adoption order. With that adoption order, you process the adoption certificate.
Okay.
From 2012, adoptive parents who have been able to get an adoption certificate can get a birth certificate. It's not mandatory, but you can. The adoption certificate is enough because it has your names now as the adopting parents. But you can go the step further and actually have a birth certificate, and it will have the mother's name, the adopting mother's name, and the adopting father's name. And the child has a birth certificate like every other child. So the first one that they got is obliterated, inatolewa kwenye record.
Yes.
And now the new one becomes the one that they will be using.
So the social services ministry must have basically like a teams for children, like where you change ownership. Like so previous owners.
No, well, I wouldn't put it that way, but there's definitely the director of children's services and so the director of registration of children does have a register, and it's, by the way, it's real, and it's very strict. You can't just go changing names.
Yes.
Yeah. So even, let's say, like changing the name of a child who had a birth certificate and then got adopted, they have to even get what do they call it? A certificate confirming that this process has been carried on well before they make changes to that register. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
So every child you see on the street, they are on record somewhere.
They should be. A number of them are not, but they should be. They should be. And there's work to be done, like you were saying, for street families. Maybe because of their vulnerability, the baby will be born not in a hospital. That cannot be their biggest concern, because their biggest concern maybe is just to find milk for that baby. Their biggest concern surely would not be to, ati ni wapi watoto wanaendaga ku register. So there's policy, there's so much work that needs to be done. Every so often there'll be maybe like children officers going around to try and sort that out. But I can almost attest it to be true that there are many children out here who are not registered and therefore not recognized.
As in, they are technically, record-wise, they are non-existent.
Correct. And you imagine, of course, they'll grow. They'll be 18. Where does such a child begin?
Special forces.
Yeah.
I was on a movie. Special forces where they look for your fingerprints anywhere.
Imagine that, but imagine having such a challenge when it's actually possible to have policies of we know we are in Kenya and we know we are very vulnerable, especially socioeconomics.
Yes.
Yeah, who's going around ensuring that street families are also registered? The babies that come from those unions are registered. Whose babies are those, if they won't be, at least have the protection of
government? But the government should. Ata kama basi, they need to be registered. They need to be registered with a plan then.
Correct.
Like, yes, you've registered them, then what
now
next?
Now you're talking. Exactly. Where is the policy that takes us from vulnerable birth to vulnerable existence to?
Yes.
Yeah, where is that? That's what needs to happen.
Okay, sawa. Asante sana, and it's interesting. I understand that we also have couples that adopt children. I say a full family, kama 3 children, and they are okay. Shout out to them, and a big shout out to them. Absolutely. Living in a concept that you all know you are not relatives, all of you.
Absolutely. But it's a good thing. Love wins all the time. Love wins.
Love wins. That's a small country. Interesting. By association. Mazi, thank you very much for creating time for us. Asante sana kwa kukuja. Any question I ask next will open a new line of conversation, but people, please go read the Children's Act. Asante sana. Where can people get your services?
Well, okay, in terms of where my office is?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for having me.
Karibu.
My office is in West Park Towers in Westlands. And I'm happy to leave you my number if people would want to call so that we can have these conversations.
Social media. As in, for the serious people, the people who seriously need your services, watakam maybe to your website.
Oh, yes. The law firm does have a website.
Yes.
We run the law firm. It's called R.W. Mbanya and Company Advocates.
Okay.
So, they'll be able to get details and contacts for where to find us.
Sawa.
Yeah.
Asante sana R.W. Mbanya and Company Advocates for hizo mambo za family affairs na kujua welfare ya watoto. I believe you are very passionate about children.
Absolutely.
The way you were seconded to tukutafuta, the people we had to go through ndio tukuget, that was good vibes.
Thank you for having me. It's discussions that are close to my heart, so thank you.